When the HOA told me I couldn't build a small garage extension on my own property, I thought it was just a misunderstanding. But then the threats came, the fines piled up, and they tried to humiliate me in front of my neighbors. What they didn't know was that I had more patience, more resources, and more determination than they could imagine. And in the end, I didn't just beat them. I bought the very building they ran their operations from. My name is Paul. I'm 67 years old, a retired engineer, and a proud grandfather of 3. After decades of work, my wife and I finally settled into a peaceful home in a quiet neighborhood. My joy was simple, spending time in my garage workshop. I loved working with wood, fixing old tools, and even restoring vintage bicycles for local kids. But as my projects grew, my space shrank. My garage was just too small. So I made plans to extend it by about 10 feet. Nothing fancy, just enough room to fit a proper workbench and some storage. I even got a licensed contractor, filed all the town permits, and got official approval from the city. Everything was in order. Or so I thought. Because the HOA had other plans. The first letter arrived only a week after the work began. Dear Mr. Paul Henderson, your garage extension is not in compliance with HOA rules. Cease construction immediately or face fines. I was stunned. I had every legal permit. The city approved it. How could they say no? I called Margaret, the HOA president, a woman known for her bossy attitude and love of control. Margaret, I said calmly, the city approved my plans. Everything is legal. Why is the HOA interfering? She sniffed. Legal doesn't mean appropriate. Your garage extension doesn't match the community's aesthetic standards. It makes the neighborhood look cluttered. I nearly laughed. My garage extension was at the back of my house. It couldn't even be seen from the street. But she wasn't joking. The next week, another letter arrived, $100 fine for noncompliance. Then another, $200 fine. Then threats of legal action if I didn't stop the project. I felt cornered, but I wasn't the type to back down. At the next HOA meeting, I stood up and tried to reason with them. Look, I said, holding my papers, I have the permits. This is legal. I'm not hurting anyone. Margaret smiled smugly. Rules are rules, Mr. Henderson. If you can't follow them, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you. The room went silent. A few neighbors looked uncomfortable, but no one dared speak up. That's when I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about control. One evening, after yet another threatening letter, I sat in my workshop staring at the unfinished wall. I felt angry, but also determined. All my life I had built things. Bridges, machines, even small businesses. I wasn't about to let a power-hungry HOA bully tear down what I loved. I decided I wouldn't just fight them. I would outsmart them. So I kept building, but at the same time, I started digging into the HOA itself. I read their bylaws, financial reports, and meeting notes. I asked questions around town. And slowly, I found cracks in their empire. One very big crack stood out. The HOA didn't own their own office space. They rented a small building downtown from a private landlord who had been trying to sell it for months. And that gave me an idea. First, I kept my garage project going. The HOA sent more fines, more letters, even threats of lawsuits. But I ignored them, knowing the city's permits protected me. At the same time, I contacted the landlord of their office building. He was an older gentleman, tired of dealing with tenant complaints, and eager to retire. Would you consider selling the building? I asked him. His eyes lit up. Absolutely. I'll give you a fair deal if you can close quickly. I used some of my retirement savings, along with profits from a small side business I'd run for years, and within a month, the building was mine. The day the papers were signed, I felt a quiet thrill. The HOA had no idea what was coming. I waited until their next meeting, when they were discussing, you guessed it, my garage extension. The room was full. Margaret sat at the head table, looking pleased with herself. Mr. Henderson, she said with a smirk, your fines now total over $2,000. If you don't comply, we will be forced to take further legal action. I let her finish, then stood up slowly, holding a folder in my hand. Actually, I said calmly, I think you'll be the ones moving, not me. Confused whispers filled the room. I opened the folder and laid down the property deed. As of last week, I am the new owner of the building this HOA rents as its office. Which means I am now your landlord. The silence that followed was delicious. Margaret's face was drained of color. You can't be serious, she stammered. Oh, I'm very serious, I replied. And as your landlord, I'll be reviewing your lease terms. Starting with a rent increase. If you can't afford it, you'll need to find somewhere else to meet. The room erupted in laughter and applause from the neighbors who'd been silently rooting for me all along. Cameras from the local news, who I'd tipped off, captured every second. Margaret tried to argue, but she had nothing. Legally, I had every right. She had no power over my garage, and now she had no control over her own office space. It was the sweetest justice I had ever tasted. After that day, the HOA never bothered me about my garage again. In fact, they stopped bothering almost everyone. Margaret soon resigned, her pride shattered. A new, more reasonable board was elected, one that actually listened to the community. And my garage extension? Finished. Bigger and better than I'd imagined. My grandkids now help me with projects there, just like I once dreamed. But the real victory wasn't just the garage. It was proving that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, can be brought down when you stand firm and fight with wisdom. So whenever I walk past the HOA office building I now own, I smile. Because sometimes, justice doesn't just mean winning your freedom. Sometimes, it means owning the ground your enemies stand on. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it and believe in standing up for fairness and dignity, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful stories of justice and community, stories that remind us all that doing the right thing is always worth it.